Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Resfida Yeni and in this video I would like to present about the critical interpretation of Alice in Wonderland. So the first slide is as the ruler of Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts function of Alice's primary antagonist, controlling the realm that towards Alice at every turn. As the Suite of Hearts suggests, she is the heart of Alice's conflict with Wonderland. When Alice exposes the Queen as a fraud who is nothing more than a playing card, the dream of Wonderland ends abruptly and Alice regains the world of sense and order she has known since birth. True Alice guesses the Queen of Hearts' secret midway through the book. She hesitates to call her out, demonstrating the power that the Queen of Hearts has over the character in Wonderland. Though the Queen's traits are like Wonderland itself, devoid of substance, and she still instill fear in her subject and Alice alike. And the origin of the crocodile poem Alice recites in chapter 2 of Alice in Wonderland is memorizing poems, songs, and Bible verses was a common activity for school children in the 19th century. Throughout Alice in Wonderland, Alice tries to recite various educational poems she has learned over the years. She inevitably remembers them incorrectly and instead recite a parody written by Lewis Carroll. The crocodile poem parody Isaac Watts' Priggish poem against idleness and mischief, whose opening stanza begins, "How that the little busy bee improve its shining hour and gather honey all the day from every opening flower." And the last stanza of the poem is, "In books or word or helpful play, let my first yes be paced, that I may give for every day some good account at last." The replacement of the industrious bee with the slow moving crocodile can be seen as another type of inversion, one that plays more with meaning than with sound. A crocodile couldn't be more different from a busy bee. Carol clearly had fun parodying this kind of material, and Victorian children, seeing him skewer such preachy writing, must have felt that here finally was an author who was on their side. The next is the Queen of Hearts poses an additional threat to Alice's journey toward womanhood. Alice's adventure in Wonderland recounts Alice's metaphorical journey to adulthood. Over the course of her adventures, she faces several threatening situations with sexual overtones, but the Queen of Hearts' threat is both the most direct and the most subtle. In screaming, "Off with her head," to Alice, the Queen of Hearts threatened her life but also her sexuality. Since the word refers both to Alice's literal head and her maidenhead or maidenhood, or it called virginity, the Queen of Hearts violently attempts to force Alice's sexual awakening against her will, and only with Alice's growing power and sense of self can she stand up to the Queen and call her hand by revealing her to be a mere playing card. And the garden in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland exists as an ironic object of desire for Alice. The sight of the garden drew Alice in with its beds of bright flower and cool fountains, and her inability to enter sets the tone for the exasperating details that follow one after the other. When viewed in terms of the metaphorical onset of Alice's puberty, the garden initially symbolizes the biblical Garden of Eden, a place of childlike grace and innocence that precedes the knowledge of good and evil. Alice's desire to enter the garden corresponds to her desire to remain a child indefinitely. And the next is, when she finally enters the garden, Alice discovers that it's not a picturesque childhood paradise, but a film's sham where the roses are painted and the inhabitants are dangerous and ill-tempered. The garden falls short of Alice's expectation largely because of the experiences that have preceded her arrival there. By the time she reaches the garden, she has grown up metaphorically and gained control over the fluctuating size. Her growing awareness of Wonderland allows her to perceive the garden with a critical, observant eye. The garden initially exists as a manifestation of Alice's desire to remain a child, but she realizes it is a poor mimicry of adulthood. in which two-dimensional adults follow arbitrary manners and convention that parody the conventions of the above-ground world. The king reads Rule 42 in the books. It means that all the persons more than a mile hike to leave the court. Alice point out that if this is the oldest rule in the book, it should be number one. But for unknown reason, the number 42 was important to Carol. He uses in other books, including the sequel of Alice in Wonderland, True Looking Glass, and in the Old Testament, bears kill 42 of Alice's tormentors, and the children of Israel and their 42 stays in the desert. In the New Testament, there are 42 generations in Matthew Gospel, and the book of Revelation 42 is said to be number of months the Antichrist will rule the earth. As a member of the clergy, Carol was probably aware the biological numerology. As a mathematician, he would have known that 42 has many interesting mathematical properties. Could this be why the first edition of Alice of in Wonderland had 42 illustration? Rule 42 has no apparent usefulness in the context of a trial. It doesn't help maintain order in the court or further the cause of justice in any way. Thus, this rule seems completely arbitrary, as many rules must have seemed to Victorian and modern children. The next is, the reader have seen plenty of parodic verses in this book, but these verses are not parodic. They are an excerpt from Carroll's earlier nonsense poem, Says All My Fancy Painted Him. In Carroll's joking introduction, he claims that the poem was written by the well-known author of Was It You or I? The verses are a mishmash of pronouns, impossible to understand, as if even the poem's narrator isn't sure whom he's talking about. This is another example of wordplay, recalling how often Alice has tried to figure out who she is and whether she still is the same person. The verses seems like the perfect summary of her dilemma, but now that she has become confident about who she is, Alice has no problem announcing, I don't believe there is an item of meaning in it. And the most important way in which Alice has changed in Alice become increasingly assertive and self-reliant as the book progresses. But in the chapter 12, she reaches a new level of confidence. The fact that she's trial witness seems to galvanize her. She repeatedly challenges the authority of the king and the queen. As the chapter begins, Alice speaks up in her own defense, but as soon as evidence is introduced, she begins to be protest on behalf of the knave. When the queen says the verses prove the knave's guilt, and Alice totally defies her. Why? You don't even know what they are about. Once the verses have been read aloud, Alice says they are meaningless. When the queen tells her about to be quiet, Alice refuses, and she has grown to her full size. She has nothing to fear from anyone in Wonderland. The last one is Alice's movement from place to place are often illogical or inconsistent. When Alice reaches the end of the rabbit hole, she is in a long hallway. When as a giant, she creates the pool of tears. Carol doesn't explain why the pool doesn't sip under the hall doors, nor does he make it clear how a pool on a level surface can be deep enough to swim in, but also have a shore. When the white rabbit meets Alice in the hallway, he orders the fetch his gloves and fan, pointing in the direction she should go to find his house. After running for a while, Alice comes upon the house, which is outside. How did she get out of the hallway? The crooked game is in a walled garden, but the griffin is able to lead Alice to the Caesar very quickly, and the knave's trial is held in a court of justice, which presumably in their castle, since the kings and queen thrones are there. Carol doesn't show Alice and the griffin reaching the castle, and he just say that when they arrive and the trial is about to begin. This is in keeping with the novel's dream motif. And also in this book, there are feminist theories are divided on Alice's characterization, but no one can doubt that the queen is meant to be exceedingly troublesome. She is intolerant, vain, and furious at the world, and a terrible ruler. Wherever she goes, chaos follows, and the other two women in the book, and the cook and the duchess, are nearly as bad. The cook uses so much paper that clouds of it float in the air and making the baby howl and sneeze, and with no warning she starts throwing heavy objects around the kitchen. Meanwhile, the Duchess calls the baby a pig, shakes him violently, and finally throws him to Alice. All of these women are senseless and violent. Although Alice herself defies the Victorian stereotype of the docile little girl, and the other females could be seen as dreadful example of women misusing power and sowing destruction. So that's all about my critical interpretation of Alice in Wonderland. Hope you enjoy it, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.